Oof. How are you gonna do that? That's tough. And well, I mean, okay, on the one hand, it's not really that tough. On another hand, I think you mean I think I'm gonna read a little bit more into it. I don't know if you're still here, Smoke, but you're looking for a game you want to 100% and feel uh, a sense of accomplishment, right? You want an emotional 100%. You're looking for an emotionally satisfying 100%. I was thinking about Hollow Knight. That's a game I did not 100%, but I do play it on my free time. I've the I would say technically it doesn't take much to 100% it. Where from where I am now, I did the two rarest achievements, the ones that deal with Iron Man. So there's an Iron Man run requirement for Hollow Knight. You have to complete everything with hardcore on. So because I accomplished that, I didn't go back and laundry list my way through the other ones. So there might still be a chance that I will probably go through it. But I think the thing was called Steel. The mode is called Steel Soul, but I forgot what the achievements. Let me take a look. Hollow Knight is great, by the way. If you're really into the quintessential gold standard of Metrovania games at the moment, I would probably say Hollow Knight would be on top of somewhere. Top 5, top 10, statistically. Among veterans, like those who frequent Metrovania games. Hollow Knight, here we go. Yeah, 42 out of 63. 42 out of 63. It's the one that I would say is probably gonna be rough is, yeah, this new layout is not working for me. Well, the other one that I haven't done that would be interesting is Speedrun 2, which is complete the game under 5 hours. It wasn't too bad. I actually completed the Steel Soul mode under 10 hours. And this one, completing under 5 hours requires that you don't need any like diff change or anything. Steel Soul mode means you can't die. You can't die once at all. And the reason why it's a little bit there's a Steel Heart is the achievement. It's the hardest achievement, which is you have to do Steel Soul mode and 100 complete the game. So you have to do 100% game completion with Steel Soul mode. So and I'm gonna tell you that it is not a boss that kills you most of the time. It's a platforming level, and it's the most infamous platforming level arguably one. Now here's the thing, 100% is great in that game. It's actually 118%. I mean 112%, sorry. 112% includes all the hardest things in the game. The 100% is the easy completion. So you have to do the 100% completion in Steel Soul mode, but you don't have to complete 112%. That is a separate achievement. The 112% involves the control breaking, throwing the control across the room bosses and versions of them. So it's actually the easy mode. And I don't think there's a diff setting for the game. It's Steel Soul is a condition mode. It's not a like diff mode. Like if you can beat the game, you can possibly beat the game without dying. It's a conditional mode. So I don't think there's a hard, at least I don't think there's no like diff settings. There's no diff presets. The game is fundamentally based on, yeah, there's no, so 100% is it's to get 100%, you can avoid all the like the incredibly high fail bosses, And what I mean by high fail is, if you're on Steel Soul, since you can't die once, you can skip most of it since it's cumulative. It's 112, so you can interchange 12% near the end, so you can skip certain bosses that have a high fail rate. And what I mean by a high fail rate, I don't mean you can't beat it. It's you require multiple tries. And the true grail of this game is to ultimately complete the game without ever dying, like once. And that's the last two, which is what I did at the same time. I finished the Steel Soul. I told myself, if I'm going to do Steel Soul, it has to be 100% because I'm not going to do it again. Near the end, I was so close to dying, and it deal with a platforming segment, because to get the 100%, you have to do the stock version of this level, and it's all parkour. Like, everything is parkour, and there's no way to recover. There's no, like, once you're stuck, you're stuck. And guess what? That level is around 95%. So when you die, you're going to start over nearly from the end. And it's guaranteed to happen that way, no matter how many percentages you skip around. So that is it. But 100%ing, I think 112%ing the game is 5.1%. Pure completionist is the way to go. I don't even have that. I didn't even do a 112% run with the game because I stopped at 100% because I was at Steel Soul mode. Like, I wasn't going to attempt those bosses. I knew I wasn't going to be able to combo game my way through the last 12% because it involves doing a boss that I need multiple tries at. Like, I can't do back to back. It's not my jam. I'm not a combo gamer. There's a different, I like to consider myself a completionist, not a combo gamer. And there are achievements and completionists that requires combo gaming, but that's as far as I go. Completionist first, combo game second. And I usually call those people, the combo gamers, the more elitist, the perfectionists, and I'm not one of them. And not in the elitist, not in a way of negative. It's they strive for excellence, so they try to push the barrier. I'm not a barrier pusher. I tend to know where my limits are, and I aim for them. I actually play the game that I didn't 100%. It's a rhythm game called Rhythm Sprout. It was a couple months ago. If they release a new track and more things, I'll probably revisit. But at the very top is involving combo gaming, and I can't combo game. Like, I know where I'm going to stop, and I stopped at basically around 80 to 85%, generally speaking. If 100% is unattainable, I stop. But Yakuza series is a consistency series. It's a completionist game is what I call it, and that's what I mean by a completionist game. It's so different from Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight is a mechanics game. It's really charming. I love its charm, like its visuals and stuff, but at its core, it does exactly the opposite of what I've been doing with Yakuza, because it is a mechanics game. So it's like Osu. If Osu's like metals, right? Say you become a metal collector. Osu is a mechanics game, so the metals are like absurd. Like, what I mean is, it will feel absurd because it's a mechanics game. But if you're a completionist game, then those metals would not be centered around a core mechanic, which is what Yakuza is. Yakuza is not centered around a core mechanic. Even the combat elements are not even centered around. Like, you would be a snob elitist if you say you should not use weapons, which trivializes a lot of the Yakuza things. You should not use cheese strats. Like, for me, today I was hitting Tanemura's chapter, and he is notorious for just being when you're doing an honest fight. So I am aware there's an infinite loop somewhere in that game, in that boss fight, but I'm not going to go out of my way to find it when I already have a sufficient strategy to beat it. But it would be safest to know the infinite loop, right? Or determine an infinite loop. And there were some times in Yakuza where there was a boss like, yeah, I gotta find it. So I was reading, like, I tried different frames and tried to get the loop going or seeing what I can exploit. Hollow Knight is not one of those games. It is a mechanics game. Completionist games, like Yakuza, relies on the idea of finding exploits, finding the puzzle to the piece, and that's where the reward comes from, getting it completed. So it's tough. I mean, for myself, you probably, since you have access to my Steam profile, you probably noticed that what a profile of a completionist probably looks like compared to a profile of someone who's a perfectionist or an elitist, a high skilled player. A high skilled player tends to have low percentage in playthrough rates and completion rates. They tend to have extraordinary amounts of time in specific games and may also have very rare achievements in very popular games that are achieved less, because the percentage of the achievement is based on how long, like the rare achievements are based on how many people play the game and how many people fail to get the achievements. So the only reason I have 0.01% rare, like 0.1% rare achievements is because I'm a niche player. So I play games that discourage people from finishing the games, but since they're completionist tasks, I am the rare person who would stick it out and complete the task. So most of my rare achievements tend to be low percentage because I play games that people don't play, and they don't want to play because it doesn't feel familiar. And because they don't feel familiar, they can't master it. So like, I rarely have, but you can see that I have daily drivers. Like I played over on Steam alone, I played over 7,600 hours of Neverwinter, right? I have daily drivers, but those daily drivers are completionist type daily drivers. They're MMORPGs. You play them for completion over time. So it's one of those things. There are many ways to get at rare skills. I like gaining rare skills. I don't like mastering skills, or like I don't have a propensity to master any skill. So you'll rarely ever find any competitive game on my Steam profile, like even barely even trying any of competitive games, because I'm not here to master a skill that can be transferable. So if I played something way back, like an RTS game, it is less likely for me to try to master another RTS game unless that game is rare and it introduces a rare skill, which is things like, I like Hades, for example, but Hades is a top-down action RPG, but they spun it in a way that made me want to complete it, as opposed to making another Diablo, for example. So that's kind of what I like. I used to play FPSs, and then therefore now I don't very often, unless it's different. So the closest things that I can tell you that I might be able to play in the future that's a competitive FPS is maybe like a competitive PvPvE game that features first-person shooting. I used to play Overwatch. Like I was in Overwatch beta all the way up to when they announced and imminently introduced Overwatch 2, and that was it. That was my last quote-unquote FPS game, something that comes from the first-person perspective, and because it was different, sort of. I skipped over Team Fortress 2, so it was something that was different from playing Halo, for example, or uh what's another FPS that I might have had experience. It's just the experience has to be novel, and novel enough that I'm collecting a skill. I'm a skill collector. I'm not a skill master, so I rarely say I would be. Uh, here's the catch 20. Here's like the big deal. I am good at video games. That's what I can say. I'm very good at video games. Not many people can actually say that because they play video games to be good at a video game. For me, I want to be consistently performing in 80 percentile across most video games, like the video game type. I want an aptitude of being a jack of all trades, but not a master of any. So any person in those video games can crush me, but I'm not there to crush them. I'm just there to see what the game has to offer. So when it comes to picking up games, that's what I do. I pick up games. So the next new thing, if it's a slice of life simulator detective story with a Candy Crush mini game, I'm probably going to be there. If it's a From Souls, if it's a FromSoft game, Bloodborne 2, I'm nowhere near there. Like, I'm not going to be interested at all. Like, I will love to watch someone who is interested. That's what I do instead. I watch other people. I watch other people love the things they do love. So I just don't want to do that. So vicariously, I enjoy watching people get headshots and do like 360 no scopes and whatnot. They're amazing. I can't see myself spending 90% of my time getting to that level. I prefer to spend that 90% of the time acquiring like 100 different experiences, which is why it goes back to Yakuza. It is me. Like, Yakuza represents a guilty pleasure of mine. It's the thing that resonates with me. I am so fickle that I prefer to be doing 5 mini games in a game than playing one really good Souls game or something. Because effectively, to me, it's the same thing. And that could be very repulsive to other people who say, no, there are nuances and stuff. Like, I understand. But the difference between Mahjong and Shogi is atmospherically, uncalculably different than playing 2 Souls games. When you play Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2, no matter how much you distinguish between them and understand the nuance that makes all the difference, it is incredibly nowhere in the ballpark of the difference between knowing how to play Mahjong, Blackjack, chess, and Shogi. In fact, chess and Shogi is so phenomenally different. Even at the surface level, it might seem subtle. It is still far more different than one Souls game and another Souls game. Like, what I mean is, even comparing Dark Souls 1 to a Souls clone like Mortal Shell, for example, even then those differences are not sufficient for me. I prefer to swim and run as opposed to run and sprint, if you know what I mean. Because like, swimming is farther away from running than running is from sprinting. Even though sprinting and running are really different, like they're incredibly different, I still prefer the thing that's even more different. And that's kind of why we talk about these things. Like, science in general, that's how science works. If you're an intellectual mind, you are constantly looking for the next different thing. And there are a few guilty pleasures. I do have guilty pleasures, so that don't change. So I'm not saying I'm literally unable to empathize with people who love their competitive games, like always playing CSGO, and I can empathize with that. And my guilty pleasure are deck builders. deck builders fundamentally produce an astronomical permutation of rules, but the unfortunate part is because of that focus on rule making, at some point the permutations of rules are exhausted. So now when you play deck builders, there are fundamentals about deck builders that are transferable. So it's a guilty pleasure of mine. When I pick up a deck builder game, I will probably exponentially, significantly complete the deck builder much faster than the average person, because most people are not really interested in thinking like that, or the normalization of deck builders is non-existent. So when you think of deck builders, it's a little different from competitive deck constructed deck building. So we're not talking about Magic the Gathering, Pokemon trading card game, Hearthstone, although I do at some point have played all of them, like Yu-Gi-Oh and whatnot. That's competitive, constructed, standardized deck playing. That's like between opponents. Deck building is like, hey, you know, um, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, wait. What did you think I was thinking of? Deck building. As in like construction, like building a deck, like in the backyard deck. Sorry, I should have made that clear. That not not deck building like home improvement, like building a patio deck or something in your backyard. Um, but a card deck, yeah, card deck building, and that's a thing that does a lot. Um, for me, like it's a guilty pleasure. Like all the fundamentals are there. When you start a deck builder, there are fundamentals: resource, a form of resource, a form of cost, like cost per mana. There's a energy curve. There's a power curve. There are stats, right? Very specific fundamental stats, and then there are pillars of mechanics: graveyard or discard or an exhaust, actives, passives, cycling, persistent effects, like life counts. So all those carry over. So when it comes to deck builders, when I pick a new hard deck builder up, I just skip everything because it's legacy. There's so much legacy. And the discovery is the different permutations you can make with the rules. If there are like 100 rules, you can at least make 100 times 100 different types of permutation of the game. So the more rules it explores, the more likely it'll be a unique experience. And deck building has basically saturated fundamental rules now. So like you might be thinking, wow, that's a lot of combinations, 100 times 100, that's 100,000 types of games or something. But sure enough, through enough iterations, most of those fundamental rules have existed. So it's gotten to the point where I play those games, seeing the joy of playing those games is seeing which rules and permutations they decide to include in their game and how do they spin their specific rule sets. So when we talk about like tabletop games, board games, and like RPG games with rules and stuff, those are my guilty pleasures. So whenever I play like a puzzle game or something like that that have rules that you have to follow and how to maximize the rules or maximize a loadout and whatnot, that's the fun part. So I have a soft spot for deck building. And then the second part, as an extension of that, is tycoon games, simulation games. So how to best produce a wad of cash at this rate with these 3 units, with these 3 characteristics that can be altered to create the highest output. So logical systems stuff. That's the only reason is I do that in real life. So like I did that as a career. My career revolves around problem solving by doing those things. So in a video game form, it's natural, right? It's one of those things I'm comfortable with. So like if you're really good at first person shooters, as a person that is intuitive, you might just gravitate towards first person shooters to begin with. right? For me, that's what a guilty pleasure is saying. You're intuiting something you like. But intellectually, most of the time I don't do that. If it comes by, I intuit my enjoyment of it, a deck builder, and then every other time I'm exploring something that I don't usually play. So, and it has to be a long commitment. It's an 80% commitment. So at most, I must complete something I go out to do. And my current goal is to play every single Ryuga Gotoku Studios game, which is all the Yakuza games 1 through 6, Like a Dragon, and then Lost Judgment and Judgment, before I make an overall essay or statement about the series. And by then, probably includes Like a Dragon Gaiden and Like a Dragon 8. Because I don't think I'm going to finish before the 2024 release of Like a Dragon 8. I don't think so. Anyways, that's a little bit about myself. I don't usually, just so you know, it's kind of common for me. This happens, this is planned, by the way. My friend Eric, who was with me today, we usually do game night on Wednesdays and Sundays just to catch up and talk about stuff, because we're both highly analytical intellectuals who are scientists by training, and he's my like brother from another mother. Basically that guy where if you ever had a friend who you were fortunate enough to meet that requires no explanation to each other, you know, like basically join at the hip, but without actually by coincidence, he's the guy. So whenever I speak to something, we don't usually speak at each other, but with each other most of the time. So when I share example, he tends to follow me up with an example that I wanted to talk about already. So whenever he talks about something, I look for the next thing that he's about to talk about, and that's what he does too, because we are a very like mind. So generally speaking, it's a good break from my normal streaming stuff. My normal streaming stuff tends to be strangers that I'm adapting to and accommodating. So I often provide counter perspective and whatnot. But my friend and longtime best friend and his brothers, by the way, he has 2 brothers, we resonate. So we are best friends by the idea that we are of like mind. And we do this on Wednesday and Sundays, and we talk about stuff. So whenever we share things, we vicariously share them. So if he's interested in something and he's sharing it with me, I'm more or less likely on board. There's no convincing each other. We are very much so alike that whatever he finds interesting, I will naturally, almost statistically, 99% of the time, find interesting as well. So that's rare, and those are my best friends. And at the end of the discussion, I go on a digression. So a lot of those clips that I have on YouTube now over the last year is this segment where, I don't know, I just rant, talk about things, and whoever's there, it will probably have something that I will be able to expand upon. What do I do for work? I don't actually work right now. And yeah, the PhD, okay, so here's the thing. The PhD in my name is actually true, which a lot of times that's not true for people, you know, like, because like doctor is kind of like a video gamey, or like being a persona, like a personality, is kind of video gaming. But yeah, I actually am a person who studied science at that level. So I do have a PhD in specifically biology. It's the umbrella of biology. But if I had to like be more specific and more esoteric, it's molecular biology. And even more specific than molecular biology is virology specifically. And then it's like context is oncogenesis, like cancer. basically. So, but that's still not really often specific enough. But for the all intents and purposes of explaining or trying to be a little bit more receptive, it's I study viruses that may cause that are commonly used to learn something about cancer, and that's probably the closest we get. My colleague, all three of them are scientists as well, and he works with policy and stuff that deals with scientific problems, like problems that require someone who has that skill. And if I had to say, when you're in this mindset of higher education, so the PhD, as, the work is everything, I would say. If I had to say something, work is everything. So, at least for me, what the PhD really just stands for is a person who spends most of the time problem solving. Like that's the skill. That's the skill you get. It's the difference between getting a PhD and not getting a PhD. Is the ability to solve a problem. And what I mean by solve a problem is if your problem is to discover something, which is what's required for PhD technically, the goal is to discover something and investigate that thing to the point where you can be an expert in it that is novel from any existing body of work. That is usually the task, and the task is the problem. And if you can solve that, you get a PhD. So that's kind of in a nutshell. So when I'm talking about like video games and whatnot, that's usually what guides me. I do most things, I say most things, I read most things in a manner that best represents what I enjoy doing, which is the thing that I spent over 15 years of my life. More than half my life was dedicated to getting a PhD. So, um, that's what that stands for, and that's what it means in the title. My Twitch channel, what why I included that was okay. The main objective is I couldn't find a suitable name, right? Like a name that truncates my name was like that's where it intends. But the thought of putting that at the end is to represent that I am a problem solver. I am someone who uh can acceleratedly understand a situation, a solution, and behave appropriately or find particular methods to solve something, irregardless of the context. And that's what that stands for. And I adopted MAKU as a pseudonym, but that's just a long baggage, long story short, right? It's influenced from like anime and an anime character, but that's more or less it's very commonplace. But yeah, that's what that is. And I don't work right now. And the long story short for that one is my life was all about career and about work. And I've talked about this a couple times, and those who are around every once in a while are familiar with the story. But I'm ABC, American born Chinese, and I was raised with a very, very high achievement requirement. And the most of my early life was spent career wise. So there was once I was finishing my PhD, I reached a point where I was burning out. And that's largely why I took a break. But when I took a break, coincidentally, the big C word happened. COVID happened. So I took time off, even more time off, and then it kind of spiraled into a lot of self-interest and stuff. But since I was so career focused, I was, making ways to find things to solve. I kind of sort of have no urgency for like financial security. So right now I'm basically spending most of my time focused on just maximizing mental health and all that all the stuff that I put off when I was younger. So most of the time when I have conversations, digressions about people's welfare, their interest, or things they want to know and whatnot, I spend most of my time analyzing people. Like all that stuff that I missed as a kid. Well, now I'm learning most of all of that as an adult. And what do I have advantageous as an adult? My interest in people mirrors a kid's interest in other kids when they were younger. But now, instead, I spend most of my time interested in those same people, but I'm already trained intellectually. So now I approach the same enthusiasm that a kid would have with other classmates and whatnot. But now I'm an adult, so emotionally I'm still a kid, or I'm younger than I've ever been, but intellectually I'm well older than a kid. So I'm using my enthusiasm that I've missed as a younger person to apply the things that I've learned as an adult, and using those skills to analyze and the emotional feel that I have in interesting in the younger generation, the older generation. So now I'm just doing that for fun. And this is kind of my way to have an endless resource. Um I've looked before streaming and all that. I've people watched for a while now, like analyze the trends on social media, like follow content creation and all that stuff. So it's always been at an arm's length that I observed these things. And then now I'm participating in it. Still kind of at an arm's length. But the idea is like science, just studying the thing is not enough. It's not affirmation or confirmation of someone's theories. One must put it into practice and, practically acquire data and evidence that reaffirms what you observe. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. For the last, I'm gonna say, yeah, ever since I started streaming, I've confirmed quite a lot of things, and that's where the digressions are. The digressions that come out every once in a while are very rehearsed and have been done for a while now in my head, but now I'm spending a lot of time and opportunity to share that. Well, I think that statement's kind of weird. So I think you mean having good mental health is desirable. Mental health itself is neither good or bad. It's just mental health. So how do you afford to live and you don't work? Um, Different forms of passive income and savings is all I can really say about that. I know how much I spend, and I know how much I need to make. So if and when I need to make money, I go make money. At the moment, I don't. So, well, yeah. I mean, so I don't want to say this like true most of the time, but if there is someone who is good at solving problems, typically a universal problem, one that comes up a lot is money. And securing money is a really fundamental skill. It's not to say that there aren't quote educated people or intellectually trained people are assumed to be good with money, but typically, statistically, they are. What makes it seem rare a lot of time is because there are rare higher educated people in general. So the odds of you meeting someone who is highly educated and is good with money tends to be low already. But typically they go hand in hand. So like you know when to spend and when not to spend. Now now what you also said could imply that I'm good with money, which that's a fair statement because not all smart people not all smart people choose to know how to use money. So that's fair. That's a fair statement. So like a smart person isn't a given fact that they are smart in using money. However, they are typically good with money. So what I mean by that is smart people, and when I mean by smart people, I don't mean genetics or anything. We're just talking about people who know how to solve problems, and that's pretty much anyone given the proper context. So someone who is smart on average, just say like they have multiple skills. Those multiple skills may not include money, but typically they are good enough with money that it's not a problem. So if you find a reasonable person, they tend to make do. And I'm making do. But I can also tell you that I'm pretty good with money too. Like what I mean is probably above average because I choose to learn about how money works. I am someone who is educated, who spent time understanding how money works. And many of my colleagues or people that I know don't usually prioritize that in the same way that I do. On the other hand, I'm not very good at making money. I know how to make money enough to support myself, but I don't want to do it. And what I mean by that is you can know how to make money, but you have to choose to do it. It's kind of like saying, I think I can complete a game. I think I can complete this game, but I don't want to do it. So you can be money smart, but not good with money, so to speak, as well. No, there aren't really any personal questions, in my opinion, but that's something you have to learn. That's something you will have to not assume about other people. That's very reasonable and very conscientious. But for myself, I don't. I 95% of the time, I'm gonna be a little generous. I'm gonna say 95% of the time. I do not segregate between personal questions, and I don't know what the opposite of non-personal question is. Just questions. Cause I'm not a very sentimental person. What I mean by sentimental is, I am very trained at understanding my emotional intelligence. That you can probably ask pretty much anything, provided it doesn't force me to violate Twitch rules, right? So we have to remember that we do use a platform that have rules. So as long as it doesn't break any rules, it's good to go. And I have an answer for all of them. Generally speaking, I would say 95% of the time, I will have an answer for all of that. Like, even explaining the contextual necessity of having thirst live action videos in Yakuza, for example. It's not uncomfortable. It's not, there are very few things that are emotionally compromising. And learning and speaking intellectually about anything is fair game. One thing that's off limits and might be under the category of personal questions is that if the question I'm answering affects someone else personally. Lucky for that department, I am a loner. And that's probably also why I am a loner. It's a great contributing factor to facilitating an open mind. I am also not strapped down by questions that may affect other people. And typically, that's how personal questions become personal. They may affect other people. So, for example, you cannot ask me, or I will find that I will give you a half truth if you ask me about people I have helped in the past. That's would be personal to them. A loner is not a relative term. You're talking about. I'm not using loner in a relative term. You are thinking that when I say loner, you're talking about a mentality, which that's fair. That's a relative term. But I'm using the word loner as in I'm single and I live alone and think alone most of the time. I'm using it as an objective term. It's not relative at all. It is someone who is literally alone. Not the feeling of being lonely, how you tackle loneliness, or your desire to be around people, or you have friends that know you. None of that. I am preferably singular in nature. So that's what I mean. So I'm using it as an objective term. I am not telling you that I prefer to be alone. I'm not, when I say I'm a loner, it doesn't mean I prefer to be alone. That's a relative term, for sure. So loner as a personality is a relative term. Yes. That's probably what you're thinking when I'm saying a loner. And then you pretty much remove the doubt by saying it's a relative term. So I'm not saying that's a personality. I am literally a person that lives alone. Or like exclusively, even in a shared household, I am alone. I do all my decision makings alone. I make money for myself only, like that kind of thing. Like my finances are just my own finances. I do not have a significant other. I do not have children. I do not have a boss. I don't have employees. That kind of thing. So, when you ask about money and personal questions, that's what I mean. So when you ask me a personal question, it rarely ever affects anyone else because it's only my own. But I assume that's easier. Yeah, yeah. And then I'm using the effort to remove that. So then the next time it happens, it's easier too. So now you don't have to ever question that. It is easier just to say anything's relative, actually. So when you're assuming a blanketed statement. So it's not very informative to anyone. What I mean by that is the way you're presenting is a it's an open-ended statement that someone cannot add to. And what I'm attempting to do is to make it more detailed so that it means something to me. If you say, well, loner is a relative term, what is that telling me? What is that telling you, actually? And what are you trying to tell me? It doesn't say very much, if you know what I mean. Kind of like my filler phrase, if you know what I mean. It doesn't mean anything if you're not on the same page. So I was trying to get ourselves on the same page by telling you what my use of the word loner means to me, so that you know exactly and not be off, right? Um, yeah, no personal uh, yeah, I would say those are probably the only personal questions that are off limits. The only personal questions that are off limits are if they are personal to someone else who happens to know me. So things like, what if the non-loner, so not non-loner questions, like, if you ask me about my friends, then that can be a little tricky because it depends if it's personal to them. Rarely anything is personal to me as long as it's about me exclusively. Which it can be anything, which I've been asked anything. I mean, AMA is really AMA outside of if it's not about me. And I don't think that's something that most people can empathize with. That's why the whole relative term is a relative term is probably something you probably have a lot of a significant number of topics that you can't talk about with anyone, which is very reasonable actually. I'm not actually saying I'm the statistical average here. I'm actually an outlier when it comes to that. That's why I stream and talk about these topics all the time. Because I don't typically find them embarrassing or weak or strong. So there's no like relative terms going on here. I'm not really concerned about how the personal, generally speaking, when someone says something is personal, they're concerned with their feelings, like their uncomfortableness and whatnot. I can't empathize with that. I generally can't empathize with that. Maybe once in a blue moon, there's something I can empathize with. Like, I don't know. And this is where the relative term comes in. What is considered personal? You're going to probably say it's a relative term, and I would agree. What's considered personal is a relative term. For me, it is irrelevant 95% of the time, I would say. Yeah, 95% of the time. If you ask me about, like, why am I unemployed? I would tell you that I lit up like a supernova and I was on cloud 9 and I was a superstar. Personal is different for everyone. That is untrue. Personal varies from people to people, but not for everyone. That is an absolute statement. And an absolute statement means there's only two people that can have similar personal agreements, and that would invalidate that statement. Personal usually differs between people. That's a fair statement. Personal is different for everyone. That is untrue. Because if that were true, we would have a very, very poor problem of being couples or getting married or even having children or being siblings. That's a very dangerous statement. If it's always different, when you word it like that, it makes more sense. Yeah. So like we have to agree on something we have to agree on what is personal in order to come to an agreement, right? So like if I love someone or like two people fall in love, there are going to be things that they know are personal and they agree together. And there are things that they agree that are not personal. So that brings them together. But if everyone is inherently and generically always different, that makes procreating very, very hard for the human race. So in general, it's on a spectrum. I would say, and you said it before, you said relative, right? Like it's a relative, these are relative terms. But the idea is for two people to come together, they would have to have something that makes it agreeable. And one of the biggest points in two people's relationship is what's considered personal and what isn't. That's a really big talking point. And because the human race is still overpopulated and people love each other and they still have kids to populate the earth, it's probably fair to say that not everyone think personal is different, if you know what I mean. Like, if we see the reality, if everyone thinks personal is different, there are not going to be a lot more kids. Like, they're probably a lot less successful. Like, the human race is probably a lot less successful. I'm going to say 70. I don't know any statistics. I'm just going to pick a ballpark. 70% of people, 60% of people probably could agree on what is personal and what is different among couples on Earth. So any couple that has a child, probably 60% of them can probably agree on what's personal and what's not. Because they successfully had a child and they're happily married. Oh, okay. We can make it even better. I would say 80% of all couples who are happily married and have a child would probably agree that they know what personal is between them if they're happily married. But then we have like all the others, right? So I'm basically changing the rules so that the pre-selection conditions favor my argument that there's at least one couple on this planet that think personal is the same, or like most of the personal stuff is the same, and that must be one happy married couple, because if most of the stuff they is great. But I'm just being antagonistic now. So don't mind me. Like I don't want you to feel uncomfortable about what you say. What all you said was very fair. It's it's fair game. Like the things you say are acceptable. Like a lot of people agree with you. They can envision that. My goal is I'm always looking for another way to interpret it. Another way to make it sound interesting. So making it allows me to remember all these things. So from now on, I'll remember this conversation a lot better because I'm actively participating in your statement, as opposed to say, fair enough, I agree. Now you're just going to remember this entire incredibly digressing point, at least some of it, right? For a little bit while. That's fair. That's fair. That's a double negative, but I think that's a triple negative. So I think you're saying you are comfortable in hearing other people's opinions and constructive criticism. If you know what I mean. That there's a inside joke between me and a few people about the prevalence of using double negatives, and then double negatives can get confusing because if you're saying you're not uncomfortable, are you saying you're comfortable, or are you saying you're even worse? Like you're not only uncomfortable, you're more than uncomfortable. I'm sorry. This is a fun topic, using double negatives, but I understand you're comfortable with other people's opinions and constructive criticism, etc. It's fair. Nah, you're fine. It's actually I make it sound like it's a problem, or I make it sound like it's a deficiency, but it's actually, so the way you're speaking right now, you're an English speaker. You're a primary English speaker. In fact, you might even be American, right? Because a lot of times double negative is part of the emphasis of Americanization. So Americanizing wording, diction, tends to use double negatives to emphasize contrarians, like contrasting phrases. So if you said I am comfortable with people's opinion, you're really talking about negating being uncomfortable because you're focused on the negative aspect. Like you want to tell the person you're not feeling negative, as in, instead of saying what you can do, you're saying what you aren't. And that's a very Americanization. Like it's a very online Americanization. So you can give away where you're from or what type of English you're used to or who you hang out with more likely by your diction. And that's part of you. That's part of your culture. And I'm just stating these things because it's fun. I I like to be I like people to like say, no, you're wrong. I'm actually European. I'm like, whoa, dude. Okay, like tell me more about yourself because clearly my analyses and deduction of human diction is a little different, right? So then I learn more. But generally speaking, you are definitely Americanized when it's really it's far more common for American diction in English to use double negatives, which is ironic because when I grew up in high school, like back in day, one part. Oh, you are American? Okay, see, you did the, you did the, no, no, I'm American. So you mean you are American? You're not American. You see what I mean? Uh, No, and I get it. I totally get it. See, I do it too. Like where you focus on instead of you're focusing on negating as opposed to affirming. So you simply had to say I'm American or that's correct. I'm American as opposed to no, I'm American, if you know what I mean. Like, so if you talk to someone else who's not American, which I am American, smoke, so I knew exactly what you meant. But if you spoke to someone who uses non-American like tendencies, they would say, wait, are you saying you're not American? Or are you saying you are American? And there's a whole meme about this where like uh what's a good phrase? Like words that you don't want the outcome, but you say not. So like I'm not unimpressed. Like for example, I am not unimpressed. As in you're trying to emphasize that you are impressed, but in a negative way. Yeah. So it happens quite a bit. Happens quite a bit. And it's one of those things. It's fun. I think it's humorous. So it's like you can pick out when English is changing because even the words and our tendencies give away what English is, and that's why I like playing games that have dialogue and localization and voice acting because you can pick up on these. Like for example, in Yakuza, when they're translating, you they include American diction and idiom. So I knew for a fact that Sega and RGG Studios localized it to an American audience as opposed to like British audience or even a European audience who knows English that isn't British English, for example. Like what I mean is main just UK people. So when you think about these things, it gives you more information about the people behind it. And that's kind of one of the fun ones. Like one phrase that I say all the time, or like because I'm American, I also do this quite often, is I am not disappointed. The phrase I am not disappointed happens a lot. So what am I saying when I say I'm not disappointed? The meaning is different though. Like what I mean is to other Americans, if you're talking to other Americans, that phrase means something different than saying I am impressed. So when you tell someone, say, "Oh," or like I'm content or I feel fine, right? Or that looks fine. That means different than that is not fine. Or like what I mean is that is not unfine. I don't even know how to phrase it. Like it's weird, but I am not disappointed is being without disappointment. So how do you express being without disappointment to someone? You could say, I am content or something, but it's a double negative because disappointment is bad and you just want to say you're not bad. You're not in a bad state because Americans tend to phrase and emphasize things by saying they're not a bad thing. So like if they intended to say they're American, they would say, well, no, I am, like they would find a way to negate two words to say that they are. So uh I wanna get an example, but I can't think of one. There are some peeps that hang out around this time that are much, much better at examples of these because it comes out naturally, and I don't know if I can do this naturally. It only comes out when I only talk about these things because I read someone else's thing, but I do it. It's just people don't uh observe it. They don't call me out on the double negative and then make it like into a fun thing. Uh uh no, I can't think of an example. But yo, I hope pointing that out, just go into like in the future, if you ever be interested, like you can just hop into a Twitch chat and like an active Twitch chat and just see if someone's having a discussion and you can pick out um different people. Like you can pick out different types of English speakers, especially the American English speaker and someone who speaks English that is non-American. Double negatives come really strong. Or nowadays though, it's not as bad. I mean, or oh, see, that's it. That's it. I just did a American. Is not as bad, but bad is the opposite of good, and I'm saying it's not as bad. So it's good. So I could have said now it's better, or it's less, or it's less likely. Instead, I said is not as bad, which not bad is good. Right. That's what I was about to say though is because of the internet, I think the vast majority of English things like shorthand English stuff is American. So there are way more still in general, way more American uptime when it comes to English, Americanized English, than it is other forms of English. And what I mean by other forms of English, I mean even different accented English. Like, for example, if it's a Japanese person who's typing in English, a lot of times their diction actually changes a bit because they're more used to using Japanese structure and then applying it in reverse in English. So some of the word choices are very different. And that's what I mean by diction. What you said is not incorrect. You see that? Like, what you said is not incorrect. Alternatively, I could have just said what you said is correct, as in it's grammatically acceptable, but you could also use the double negative now because it's okay. Back in the day, oh yeah, I digress from that. Back in the day when you grow up in high school, we learn about double negatives. And generally speaking, when it comes to writing, like when you do free writing, when you learned how to like poetry and different like literature stuff, reading class and English class, one of the rules you learn is for writing and for clarity, you avoid double negatives. So that is not unseen. That is a no-no when it comes to writing. So if someone like read your thing, which is text, right? We text a lot now. It hasn't been as big of a thing, which I just did a double negative there. But when you're texting, speaking comes with a lot of punctuations. So when I said it's not as bad, I'm pausing and there's a lot of like context with my tone and um intent. But when you type it out, it gets confusing because you're actually writing sentences. So a lot of times when people explain problems to each other, it's funny how often someone misunderstands when people do double negatives. So like I'm I'm definitely I'm definitely uh this definitely doesn't suck. Like wait, so it doesn't suck. So is it less sucky or is it good? I just know it doesn't suck. So so it's still it's like does it just suck less? As in you know what I mean? And or like uh not bad. Not bad. That phrase not bad. It's like not bad. So is that good or just a little less bad? Yeah, the way people say stuff. So here's the thing, right? The only way you can approach that in a text format to encompass that, um, I talked about this a little bit, but language is inherently limited to the greater scope of things. So to convey everything a human is thinking, we must convert it into a language. And that language is only like a proportion of what we can convey with our brains. So our brains are being condensed into rules. That's language. But now language has multiple properties. There's speech, there's feel, there's like a lot of components. But ultimately, when you text, you lose some of those components. You lose sound, you lose time. So all that you can kind of emulate through text, but it is even more limited in text. So what you can understand then is you understanding what is limited allows you to convey it in text more as well. So when an author writes a story, right, a short story, understanding the limitations of what they're trying to convey from their brain, their minds, allow them to wield their language, written language, probably statistically better than individuals who try to intuit it. So when I say not bad, yeah, that's not bad at all. If you type that's not bad at all, it's hard to know if you're saying that's a good thing or just not bad. Like the difference between, oh yeah, that's good. It's like, wow, that's not bad. It's a lot less than writing that's not good or that's good and that's not bad. Those two things mean a heck of a lot farther from each other than someone says, oh yeah, that's not bad. Oh hey, that's good. They both mean closer. The meaning is still closer because you have vocals, you have intonation. And also, that's something that's, in my opinion, a little bit more important to English now. Back in the day, it wasn't as important, in my opinion. Because other cultures, other languages, they have tonation more than English does. But now English is spoken by a lot of those people, and intonation has largely been adopted. So now we have things like, how are you today? How are you today? How are you today? How are you today? And then you can respond, I'm good. I'm good. Like all those mean different things, but you lose all of that in text. And what happens is you have to try to accommodate with it. How do we accommodate with text? We use emotes. So emojis are kind of taking center stage on replacing sometimes English not being descriptive enough in intonation. Another way would be to add punctuation, but who likes punctuation, right? And then timing. Timing's rough. Like doing timing is even worse. Because like for example, how do you deliver a joke in text form? Like imagine this is what I think about quite a lot. And lots of people have become pretty clever in this department. How do you deliver a joke with text only? Because joke has the other elements of vocal language. Timing has it. So for example, I could say, listen here, I'm trying to tell you something. Or you could say, listen here, I'm trying to tell you something. Because there was a pause and a space, those two phrases mean different things. And jokes tend to involve not only intonation, it involves delivery, like delivery time. So there's, when you go on YouTube and you look at like comment section and stuff, people found some clever ways. Like they understand that past a certain amount of lines, the comment is hidden. So what they do is they deliver the joke and hide the punchline in the more click. So the timing is based on when the person clicks to expand. So you know how they like put rows of dots and then just push their punchline to the bottom. So there are clever ways to make text emulate timing, and that's pretty clever. So that's kind of like where I'm going with all this digression about observing that Americans tend to use double negatives in text, and then it can, you know, like it's kind of funny. It personally, it's really funny. I don't know if other people find it funny that when they get confused, but when you point it out, it's kind of, when you point it out to both parties, it's kind of funny. Then you learn how to deliver jokes in text. So if you're ever wondering, how is all this information useful? Like, how do I apply it? Like, or how do I intuit it? Well, let's just say one thing you can do is you can be very, very funny when you need to meet someone in Discord. That's a good skill, right? How do you be funny to break ice with a stranger in Discord? Or how to be funny when you need to form a team in a competitive game? Because, or how do you break the tension that people are having because your team is falling apart or something like that in text form? So it becomes a very useful skill. And that's kind of what I mean by I guess I wrote a statement on my Twitch channel. I talk about communication, like conversationalism. And conversationalism isn't just talking orally between two people. It also means improving or finding ways to achieve the results you want through written language, artwork, music, etc. So all these things are really fun, in my opinion. I could talk about these day in, day out, and other people can argue and challenge me in their perceptions, and it ultimately, these discussions then elevate both the individuals, as long as they're both mutually respectful and open-minded to each other. So in the future, you could make a joke about double negatives, and you can do it in a text form with the proper delivery, right? Things like hey, you know, you're trying to say, for example, you're trying to get your friend to play queue up with you, like duo queue with you in CS:GO. It's like, well, hey, I'm on a hot streak right now. You wanna get in the game so we can like climb. And then I would maybe put a pause or lose, but you know, pause. It's like it'll still be fun. that kind of thing. So if you leave, if you deliberately, it can mean so different if you say it all at once, right? You can say it all at once in a text, or you can text twice, wait for a response, wait a little bit, and then text again, right? So all of that is still part of the texting thing. So you can elevate, in my opinion, you can elevate and have more ways of conveying things, even though texting is very limited. Like the written language is still more limited than talking to someone directly, but it helps you practice. These types of observations help you practice observing things about language, and then you would do it naturally even when you're playing a video game, you're listening to dialogue, you're listening to delivery. When I'm playing Yakuza, when I'm looking at cutscenes again, I'm focused on people's delivery, their enunciation when they talk. You start, then it becomes easier. What I'm saying is at first you might not notice these things because you rely solely on intuition, and then over time when you practice these things, you'd be surprised how much more charismatic one can become when they spend time observing how people communicate. And one of those ways is texting, because I still have like there's a difference between someone like here's a personal anecdote. I don't text for pleasantry. So here's the thing that I don't desire very much, and most people probably notice this already about me, I guess, is that I don't usually say hi and just end with hi. I I like to live, I like to maximize the value. So if someone asks me a question, I'm going to give them an essay, because I don't want to make them feel like they just took their time out of their day to ask a question for me to just say, "Oh yeah, that's good." And it just stops, right? And what I'm saying by that, in the appropriateness of this text, is I am a stranger on Twitch. It takes a lot for someone to want to ask a question to a stranger on Twitch. So to reflect that, to understand that I am committed to demonstrating that I'm invested in this, I have a lot to say about it, and I want to say a lot. But the thing is, how can you say a lot without making it sound boring? Or how do you say a lot without engaging with, but still engage the person? So that's the idea. And a lot of what I'm doing is I'm changing up the way I say things and what I'm saying, along with how I say them, when, where, and how my words are changing. And at the beginning, it can be really rough because you're like, oh, too much things at once. Like, I have to worry about my words, I have to worry about my timing. Like, well, when you compartmentalize them and focus on one thing at a time, every once in a while, it's called microdosing. A lot of people refer to this as microdosing. Basically, you attack a skill every once in a while and you just sprinkle random skills that you were focusing on, and over time, just because microdosing those skills, they become easier and more intuitive. So over time, you can engage someone with just about anything as long as the conversation skills are up to snuff. Like, for example, I can make it seem interesting that paint dries very, very slowly. I could probably count to 100 in a very interesting way right? So that's kind of the idea. So charisma and conversationalism is something that I think will greatly, in my opinion, this is my like personal mantra or statement. Being able to focus and compartmentalize and practice conversationalism is a gateway to alleviating a lot of the mental stressors that are facing the generation of tomorrow. So my mantra here is when I digress, when I'm talking about things that will eventually, in my opinion, I'm not a professional in this field, but as professional as I can be, is a alarming trend in human communication. So, because we get to choose what we listen to, we get to choose when we listen to it, we get to choose what we see, what we want to see, all that stuff. One of the fundamental skills that enables people to solve a lot of problems is underdeveloped, or it's aggressively far less developed than other skills. We have plenty of tools, even video games support other skills, like how to be a fast clicker or how to hand-eye coordination, all that stuff. But conversations is gone. Like communication skill is there's no emphasis. Like there's no medium to help with communication skills. Even streamers or content creators or live streamers is deficient in conversational skills. People who lecture and teachers before the internet still lack development in conversational skills. So adding on the internet, when you choose when to talk and when to speak, is only exacerbating it. So my goal now is we spend a heck of time digressing on focusing on the little fun details, maybe kind of irrelevant, but the whole goal is to encourage people to find it okay to talk about and observe these things because it becomes second nature over time, in my opinion. Like very rehearsed and whatnot. So charisma goes a long way. And what I mean by it, great communication creates a foundation for a very successful person, is that the problems you need to solve tends to be interpersonal. Ultimately, the problems in one's life, and this sounds unfortunate, and some people might not believe it, but when you truly encounter a problem in your life, like your mental health, your career and stuff, it is truly a problem because it's something outside of you. So ultimately, having a foundation in communication skills enables you to find problem solutions more than yourself. So what I'm saying is, having proper communication allows you to solve problems that requires you and someone else, and those are the problems that are often highlighted faced with someone's depression, because when you're in the end of the day, when you cannot solve the problem yourself, you become depressed, right? You eventually become depressed, and it's an interpersonal problem. Then if you can't solve the problem, the solution is outside of you or includes you with something else. So if you have a communication skills, you can communicate that problem. You can find other sources. You can write to other people. You can accurately explain to other people what you're looking for or what you need or want. So one of the three pillars of a healthy, successful person is communication skills. There are two other pillars that I tend to weigh really well too, and that's regular self-evaluation, the ability to accurately self-evaluate regularly, and then a source of motivation. A perpetual, sustainable source of motivation is probably now what I call it. It used to be, it keeps maturing into a different uh, names, but those are the three. And communication is one of the pillars. If you're stuck, if you're feeling awful, you got to be able to communicate that. If you're uncomfortable, oh, here's a good challenge. How to convince someone that you understand what they're saying without saying that you understand. That's one of my a task that I like to tell people, like in my head I like to tell people to do. How can you tell someone something without directly saying it explicitly? So how do you implicitly successfully tell things? And that's what Asian languages, like what I mean is Asian culture and like cinema and stuff do so well. Of course there are pros and cons to that. The reliance heavily on implicit language is nonverbal communication is a high risk probability, but it also enhances a form of intimacy or a form of charisma. So, like, if I told you, there is a difference between approaching a stranger and says, "Just trust me," and I hear what you're saying. Just trust me. So, like, there or just the delivery and whatnot, it's great. It gives you options. So like when someone's really sad, how are you gonna go about comforting them? Well, there are many ways that deal with the simple ones, like what is the content you tell them, like, oh, cheer up, or suck it up. You know, like the context. Those are like startling. Those are really blanketed, simple techniques that you can differentiate. But what about your vocal volume? How fast you're saying things? How slow you're saying things? Are you taking breaths? Are you slurring? Are you like, there are many ways that can go beyond just your simple task. And that's a great challenge. But that's also a great determinant of who's charismatic and who's not. And I don't have to tell you, but I'm not aiming to be the most charismatic streamer in the world. However, I can tell you that I prefer to be able, I find it, in my opinion, far more rewarding to be able to convince someone without having to do anything than convince someone by gaslighting them. Yeah, it does sound like a TED talk, doesn't it? I mean, that's what the idea is. My format tends to be like those people who do TED talks. TED talks are like the simplified versions of the more like a mainstream version of explaining complicated topics. It's not a bad thing. Smokes, smokes. So are you saying it's a good thing? I'm just kidding. But I don't want to, yeah. So that's the fun thing. Like yeah. So it's not quite clear if you think it's a good thing or do you think you know, but I do get that a lot. So don't, I agree with you. Yeah, TED Talk formats is what I do most of the time. So to give you a little backdrop, to get a PhD, you also have to be able to teach something. Actually, the vast majority of the obstacle is to be able to teach something. And teaching something means you have to be charismatic enough. Like, one of the characteristics is you have to be conscientious and charismatic enough to understand your audience, deliver a topic that is more or less obtuse to everyone. So, like, as a PhD, you have to discover something that no one else bothered or want to or know about. And then your goal is to explain that so that you can get your PhD, right? So the number one task is to be able to explain something rarely anyone understands, and you have to put it in the format that anyone can understand in different contexts. And what I mean is, when you have to present it to non-biologists, or you have to present it to your boss. So the ability for conversationalism and charisma comes in the format of a TED Talk often, because you are the only expert in the topic, the very topic. Your goal is to try to explain something. So, and it goes, and I'm telling you this, and I'm wording it this way intentionally. It goes really back to the ability to communicate. If I sound like someone who sounds like TED Talk, is because that's how their format is done. They have to be able to reach out to a larger audience, and that audience is like millions of people who may not be scientists, may not be, etc. So the most successful talkers, representatives of their field, do TED Talks because they are more skilled at trying to convey something really complicated but make it so easy, a lot easier to understand. Now, there is a trade-off, right? When you simplify things and whatnot, you have to accept that it's not the entire picture. But not getting any of the picture is worse than trying to get a really complicated picture and not understanding anything. And that's what I do every day. So I inherently do it every day. So I'm not surprised that it's associated with TED Talking, but I do this for mostly everything. So when someone asks me, what is this game like? I'm going to start in a TED Talk format. Well, okay, well, let's start from the beginning, like the foundations of this game. What is this descriptor? What is the common notion of this game? And how does it fit in the current perception of the game to the audience, right? So you got to break it down. And that sounds complicated, but when I say what's in those sentences, it will meet that person's diction. So when someone says, yo, this game's hype as heck, I'm going to try to communicate in a way that resonates with someone who speaks like that, as opposed to trying to sound like myself. Like, you wouldn't go and sound really professory or scientifically if that person give you no clue that they are even on the same page. So that's kind of the idea. And that goes with being conscientious. So when someone says, well, like, why are you angry? I'm like, does it sound like I'm angry? If it does, I'm sorry if I give that impression. However, there might be a chance that you might be misinterpreting something that I'm doing as anger, and I don't typically think it's a form of anger. And then you go into the conversation and see if perhaps the other person is misunderstanding your reads, right? Like your presentation and whatnot. And that's kind of the win-win situation where you learn something, I learn something, and all of that culminates to just charisma, boosting your charisma scores. So, yes, in a way, I can get someone to listen to me talk 6 hours about double negatives. But the idea is, if I want them to stay for 6 hours, how could I get myself to speak in a manner that is relaxing for 6 hours? Because 6 hours is a really long time, right? So if this person's in a rush, then I will probably pick up the pace and get a little more angsty and try to squeeze in some stuff, right? I could be talking at another speed and it could make someone very hyper and anxious, and it can make them feel very uncomfortable if I just talk at speeds that keep jumping back and forth. So generally speaking, if I had to have a goal in mind, I will talk appropriately for that. And that's one of the great skills that I feel it gives back. The more you practice, it just gives back. Because at the end of the day, you're gonna have to talk to someone. And heck, why not make it feel like the people that how it feels great. I don't know if this is true, of course. I can't read people's minds. But I do get feedback every once in a while. And the idea is, if you're a streamer and you have to stream very long hours, wouldn't it be great to have the confidence of talking, knowing that when people hear you talk, it calms them down, as opposed to making them high strung for like 6 hours straight? Me personally, if I had to hear something and witness something for 8 hours straight, I'd be exhausted too. So the idea here is that I don't want, I need to know if I'm confident enough that I can achieve a particular feeling when I'm speaking. And it's kind of what voice actors do, right? That's why I kind of lean in on the whole voice actors. The one thing that voice actors are so great at is they are able to convey something without actually even saying it. And that's amazing. And the more you practice and observe it, you begin to appreciate the distinction between a voice actor who's just reading lines for money. Sorry, folks. I know. Voice actors have to make money too. And then those who, like, they really nail it. Like, you can see how they feel. You can actually literally feel their execution. And heck, maybe I wouldn't mind wanting to be a voice actor one day, but that's like, that would be fun for a one-off, wouldn't it? Oh, also, by the way, it's really late. You strike me as someone who still goes. You already mentioned school, so, and you sleep around an hour ago, right? The last time. Uh, Today is Thursday morning right now for me, so it's still a school week. I hope I'm not keeping you up. I'm about to like head out. I guess this is the end of the digression. I'll probably like put this up somewhere as a thing on communication skills. Usually we have like one or two other people who would just chime in on that. I took a nap earlier. I'm not tired. Smokes. Oh, okay. So you're not tired. I love it. You're so consistent. I'm not tired. It's so funny. Sorry. I'm not laughing at you. I'm just laughing at the English language. Like like you're rested, right? So no, you took a nap earlier, so you're rested right now, which is great. But no, don't worry about it. I just feel like you're so consistent with it, so it's great. Do you how's school? Like, okay, you asked about my PhD. Let's I want to hear a little bit about you. Like, what do you like about school? Or do you like anything about school? I've never been corrected on it. Nah, you don't have to be corrected on it. At least I don't think. It's pretty amazing that you've gone so far so long without being like, I wouldn't say corrected. There's really not much to correct, but what I mean is, it's acceptable in common speech. So, you're fine. But it's funny no one has pointed it out, I guess, yet. The weirdness of that. Well, right now is, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. In what way is that? Do you not like school? Or do you not like, is it tiring? Are you exhausted? Like what sticks out? What's a sticking point for school? Just a little tiny conversation. Let's have a tiny conversation about school. Part of my job is to get people to perform in school. Just, well, one of my life's calling was to get people to appreciate school, but oh, okay. Well, not school itself, I suppose. Tangentially. I'm sorry to hear that. School, huh? The way you talk about school and getting up for school, that's a very early relationship. Man. By early, I'm making a uh I'm doing two things. I'm comparing the statistical average of marriage couples or long-term relationships in the United States, since we've established we're both Americans, and then also contrasting it with my own anecdotal experience, which I'm still single. So, yes. 18 in 4 months, yeah. Really quite young. I pretty much just I took a leap of faith and say that you were in high school. But yeah, well, hopefully that's okay. I don't have to tell you that I can probably try to encourage you and encourage you to be okay with it because it's a life experience, and statistically relational satisfaction improves with multiple attempts as opposed to the other way around. So yes, you could be the luckiest guy, you can be the luckiest person in the world, but you also gain the experience, and you can, if it's cathartic enough, like if it helps enough, generally the next one is even better. I'm okay with the breakup. It's just what she said. Oh, okay. Fair enough. But you know what I mean, right? It was kind of what I was trying to illustrate when my friend asked me about what's my favorite Yakuza game, right? You're a continuum. You're a person that has continuously learning wisdom. So if it doesn't work out the first time, successive workouts come with more knowledge. As long, okay, there's a big asterisk here. As long as you choose to use it as a learning experience, which is a really big asterisk because it's assuming that you're a rational person who isn't chronically emotionally compromised. So when you're not chronically emotionally compromised, ultimately the person will intuitively integrate and better select for appropriateness that enhances their success in relationships. Not doing relationships at all is like the extreme other end, right? That's where fear prohibits practice. So when I mean by chronically emotionally compromised, meaning if you do never, if an individual doesn't ever get out of a state in which they're willing to go into another relationship, they don't ultimately ever gain the value of all of their previous relationships. It's only when you achieve a state that you're willing and intentionally seeking another relationship with the knowledge and wisdom that you gain from previous relationships, that is the condition we're talking about, that with every successive relationship, they become fundamentally better. And in the long run, you will come to a point in which you find the one. It's not a really romantic way of looking at it, but it is the way to convey the human condition logically to someone, to make them maybe okay with finding value in all the heartache and possibly think negative feeling at first in the past, but then they become your assets in the future or even in the present. And even that, yeah, you go through, yeah, most of the time it will feel that way, right? You put in the effort to gain the reward, and that's pretty apt. It's a great way. There is some extension to that, like sometimes you can be lucky. So um not we're not going Kiryu bold where that's your mantra only, right? Not too extreme, as in everything has to go through hell to go to happiness. But you can also love it when you get lucky. And some people are lucky. Like, luck is indiscriminate. So when you get those things, hopefully you can also appreciate how lucky you are. That kind of stuff. So the reason why I'm saying that is I'm adding to it so that when you get lucky, you can also feel like you have the right to be happy. In an extreme case, when someone embraces that there must be input to get output, they underplay, downplay, and possibly even harm themselves when they do get lucky sometimes. And it's worth also noting that, that time you didn't get lucky. But luck comes and goes whenever. So perhaps you might even skip over and hit the jackpot, right? It's a way to, I'm offering a balance because sometimes it can lead to things like coveting and jealousy uh and disproportionate balance in perspective that can aggravate someone. So when someone really believes that you have to put in hard work in order to get happiness, and then you witness someone who gets lucky, just reminding yourself that you can get lucky sometimes, and reminding yourself of things that you appreciate that was luck, helps with a lot of times when you get to that point where, say, you're playing Osu and you just want to get good at Osu, and then suddenly there's this kid who just comes in and it's like 2 hours and they've already exceeded you in Osu performance that you took hundreds of hours. That's kind of the thing. So there are things that you can count and be appreciated to be lucky, and then there are things that, oh, you made it. You kind of get this because you've gone through the ringer. I'm sure there might be a few things that I like to believe that you have few things that you can earnestly say you're really happy because you got lucky for it. Because that's just as powerful as saying I did a lot of work and got what I was able to get from all that hard work. Too much of something is, I'm just digressing a little bit because sometimes the biggest heartaches are not practicing appreciation for things that come easy as well. Sometimes uh, losing sight of that can be also allowing someone to take things for granted, and it does filter into appreciating someone else, and like even relationships. So I know I don't speak from this anecdotally, but it's more from observation that there are individuals who think that relationships are dissonant, how difficult relationships are dissonant with what they think the difficulty is. So like if someone goes in and say, yeah, you have to work through a lot of relationships are hard, this this and I did it and we are happy because of it. But if you solely think that, then the times when you see someone too good to be true, right? Like this says, oh my gosh, we resonate. It's like, nah, it can't be this easy. So the opposite can be true too. So not going too strong on either side is great. So whenever you get luck, you gotta seize that too. And it comes with a lot of happiness as well. I don't know where I was going with that other than just offering more. So it's, like keep offering more. I'm a more kind of guy. It can be a lot more things and we just keep going. And the more lots of things you know about, the more you're prepared for other things. Because I can tell you that when it comes to mental health, more is generally often better. There are extenuating circumstances, but it's safe to say that it helps one protect themselves, give them more tools to work with. And the thing that I'm describing is what I see a lot with underappreciation. So, someone I've been watching briefly, I like to grab inspiration from someone who's actually working in the field. So this person said that, and this statement is what I'm kind of deriving what I just said earlier about having to go to hell to go through hell to go to go to happiness. Um, there is a privilege that we have now that is underappreciated a lot because we don't think it's lucky anymore. We think it's a standard of living. And one of the things is having a choice is a privilege. And that might be a little bit too general, but let's make it even more personable and relevant to this situation. We had a choice to come online. We had a choice in who we want to go out with. We had a choice in ending a relationship. Most of the time, you might not feel like it at the moment, but if you look at it, that choice is a form of luck. You're in a position and a privilege, and sometimes having that 6-month relationship with someone, it's great. so so when you look back on it, right? Yeah, this person might hold a grudge and maybe someone they're trying to slander you and stuff. It's like, but that person is not maximizing their privilege. But you don't have to be burdened by that. Like you can have the choice to choose that, and that's the greatest privilege in my opinion. What this person said that I'm deriving this inspiration from when it comes to trying to get someone to feel great about themselves when someone else is making them feel like garbage, right? Is to empower that person to feel like they have control over this. So you can choose to feel bad about this or you can choose to own it, right? And a way to do that is to just pretty much celebrate how lucky you are in a not an easy way or a low effort way, but just you can choose when to not like someone. You can walk away from someone. And that is a great privilege. And this guy put it in the context of what context did this guy do? Oh, this guy said that going online is no, choosing what you can do or what you want to do each day is the greatest privilege of all. And he specifically was talking about how a person chooses to go online and be toxic to someone, or go online to open up to someone and got betrayed. The idea behind it is that while things suck, like you put yourselves out there or you get harmed and stuff, you continuously still retain your ability to have a choice. And that is worth a lot, because it goes without saying, we don't want to imagine when you don't have a choice, and that still exists in many ways and forms. So you choose to have a learning lesson, and you're choosing to make that learning lesson important to the next time you're in a relationship. That's kind of like a proactive, more bent for someone who's receptive to it. Obviously, this isn't like a secret sauce to everyone's chronic mental problems or feeling bad about a breakup and whatnot, but this is one of the many ways you can view such situations and be like, yeah, well, I'm just upping my game, right? Like, you live and learn. That's gonna up my game. My percentage is going up. We're playing a video game and we're getting more stats. However you view it, but that's the ultimate time. When the reason why I'm saying that is, you may literally have choices a lot of times, but the most chronically depressed people are the people who literally have choices, but they feel they don't. And I'm going to tell you, school probably feels like that right now. And I'm sorry to hear that, but it's still within your control. And that's kind of the idea. And when I mean by school, I mean school in general. Like, a lot of times kids feel that they have no choice but to hate school, if you know what I mean. So it's kind of like the same situation, but not the context have changed. And there's things like, I don't want to get a job because I need to get a job because I have to. And then the way they phrased it is, okay, so why are you getting a job? Like, how? What are the choices you're making? So there are choices within the thing that they say they have to do. And the people who can't see the choices anymore are the ones that are possibly very, very sad. Like, what I mean is, they can be the ones that they become their own worst enemy. When they start feeling like, I have to get this job because I have to do this thing. So there's no choice. I don't get to do things. And that's kind of where I'm going with this. And that's kind of what that guy was referring to, in a way. He was loosely trying to tie together that meaning, that what is the greatest privilege we have. I mean, for a bully, you could, here's a really real example. Like, a bully feels like they don't have any choice but to make themselves feel better by projecting onto a easy target, a target that doesn't fight back. Because of that, the bully conditions themselves to normalize that as their only form of coping mechanism. Well, and as the victim of the bully, it can work the same way. This bully chose me. I have no control over how this bully treats me because I just happen to be the unlucky person to be treated as the bully. And in both cases, there's an avenue in which both the bullied and the bully could be friends. But that's romanticizing. That's expecting kids, right? Younger kids who lack experience to be able to bridge that. And that's an unfortunate situation. But once you become an adult and like later on, and it becomes more and more a possibility. But early experiences can really, really hold back someone if they choose to not grow from it, or they choose not to integrate and celebrate that thing. Because if you constantly associate a previous experience with a negative, unwanted experience, you're gonna go through life conditioning yourself to forget about it, to forget that it's to make it unimportant. And when you make something unimportant and not part of you, you stop learning from it. It becomes unimportant. So the the phrase, and this goes into one phrase that I talked about quite a bit, the phrase, I just wasted my time. Like, wasting time. Yes, yes. So that's the big asterisk, right? The asterisk is emotionally compromised. How long is someone emotionally compromised? When you become super emotionally compromised, it will prevent growth. So the the goal that I like to encourage people who are emotionally compromised is to discover or to experiment over time. If they're really young, the focus is on discovery or getting inspiration. But when they're older, is to rediscover something they might have already known. The quicker, the way to encourage someone is the quicker you become less emotionally compromised, the quicker you escape being emotionally compromised, the quicker you can go on a path to growth. I call it growth, but a lot of people would say recovery then growth. But I like to look a little bit more further when it comes to these things, because you want to get distance to where, like a working place. Yeah, so it's a very fair statement. A person has to not be emotionally compromised anymore. A compromise as in you're hurting so bad, or the source of the hurt is constantly reinforcing, and you need to come up with a way to circumvent or navigate around that, or add it. However, whatever your approach is, obviously it varies between individuals. The idea is, though, it's a stopping point. Being emotionally compromised over time, when it's a negative thing and you have that negative thing. Oh, that's what you're. Oh, okay, I see. So you do have a lot of things that might be holding you back. The it does resonate and checks out with how you use negative words most of the time, as opposed to, positive words, right? There are a lot of things that kind of checks out with that. Is forgive yourself and move on. Yeah, not blaming myself. Yes, exactly. And unfortunately, um, here's one thing, right? When they say to forgive yourself and move on, this is another topic that I would love to talk to a colleague about. It's not the idea that you and yourself have to do that. You're seeing someone is because you don't have necessarily the capacity to do that yet. So the idea is you can also get someone to forgive you as well. And I know how this sounds in the current situation where that other person is like clearly not resilient, but if someone else demonstrates to you that they can forgive you or themselves and move on from something, like seeing other people move on themselves, like if you observe someone who's, or hear someone who has done this, it can be enough to inspire you to feel comfortable with that. So the controversy here right now is the current topic that this person explored, and I like to explore this, is the idea that when you are seeking help, it's a great brave like a first step to something, but it's not to be misunderstood by the person that it's all on them. It's the task you want to do, but it doesn't have to be just you providing it. So that's kind of um my words of positivity, or like trying to reword or reinterpret things, is to offer an example that isn't coming from you, because well, you're in a chronic emotionally compromised situation. But once you acquire that from maybe even someone, a source outside of you, you will permanently acquire that skill. And then in the future, that skill is something you can wield. So finding inspiration in seeing how others handle or address that is another source that's outside yourself. I a lot of times this particular person is a therapist, and he talked about one of the unfortunate circumstances that maybe is unintentional is the idea that when people are seeking help, a lot of times they're in an emotionally compromised situation where they feel like it's something they have to do. Like everything is about them. They are the problem, and that's what emotional compromise is. But what happens is unintentionally then when say a professional or a friend or family offers observation about them, it sounds like they're saying you should do that. Only you have the power to do that. Only you can only do, it's only up to you. But the idea is the disclaimer here is you're trying to find anyone, anything to help you do that for yourself. So if it means someone coming to your side and say, to heck with that, that's unfair. Like, you're not the problem. That's the problem. That could be it. So that's kind of the idea. So I've heard this many times. Like it's and it often is internalized. And there's been talk about how you would better get this, because self-help is great, right? It's one thing that gives sufficiency. But if you're completely emotionally compromised, your self-help can be your prison. Because if you're seeking, trying to improve yourself, that's the key word. Most people, when they think about self-help, is to improve themselves in a state that they're open to improving themselves. But self-help can also seem like a way to fix something that you can't help fixing, which, if I don't know about you, about your logic or how you feel about this, but if you're looking for self-help advice, then the ability to do the self-help is not existing in your current tool set. So when you go look for new self-help tools as a goal to use it, you're gonna be very unsuccessful. But if you witness someone or someone helps you use that tool, then it's a interpersonal thing. The weight is lifted a little bit and you get the aid. And it can be, it's not the strongest when it comes to seeing other people do it at a distance, but it is still far more generous than looking for something expecting yourself to do it. So what I'm saying is it's closer to coping, and then coping enough that you become in a state that you're no longer emotionally compromised. So yeah, I would say go for that puppy video. If puppies make you feel bad, feel better, or see what happens. That will see what else can happen in your situation that could turn out better, or see something that's in your future from someone who's already been there. That kind of thing is a great catalyst for getting indirect outside help. I don't know, you watch videos that make you sad? Does it help? Obviously, if you're emotionally compromised right now, it would be very difficult to know if that's accurate or not. But which I feel makes it better because people can relate to me. That's fair. Now, do they offer solutions though? Like, did anything change? Right? So the idea is if it makes you feel better because you find people that can empathize, how about in the future? You know? I see. So if I'm not a professional, by the way, so careful, right? My observation about that is that you're standing still. Yeah. Yeah, it makes you feel less alone, but it's offering cope. Like you're coping without forward movement. So it would be wonderful if you could expand that, right? If you could associate the feeling of not alone with individuals who moved on beyond that. So you're looking for a solution that's attached to the coping mechanism that you have. And then eventually eventually it will be intuitive to substitute what happens after with your coping mechanism. And then in the future, when you cope, it's associated with that. So the idea is you're, while you're making yourself feel better, it's encouraging to anyone to hear that there's additional information being gained. Coping tends to be a standstill. It's helping you negate a negative source, but it's not gaining a positive source. So you're not in a way, it's not moving forward. So every step you take, like say this, every time you go to school, it's a -5, right? You're at -5. You just lose 5 points because it's school. And then when you cope, it's like gaining, is like removing the -5 instead of adding a +5. Okay, that might sound weird, but for example, you could get +5 from playing your favorite video game, right? But +5 is unrelated to that -5. Right now, how you're describing to me is the -5 is being negated by being reminded about what that -5 is. So you're spending even more time exposing and focusing yourself on the negative feeling. It's taking it away because you're feeling not alone, right? But you are also constantly reminding yourself of that feeling. You're at the moment, an alternative would be to do something that provides you with not the feeling of that feeling, but an alternative to that feeling. So, like people who felt better, even going through that state, that is still offering non-overlapping experience and knowledge versus constantly reliving that experience. That's the alternative. The even stronger alternative is to find something that is extremely positive that overshadows that, which that's can be a little dangerous too. That's describing distraction. You're distracting from it. So what that doesn't do is it doesn't offer a solution, like a tool or something that. So the idea now is perhaps you can somehow negate that by observing it and then associating it with something that goes a little bit beyond that. So you're always getting like +1. Then tomorrow it could be +2 because you go further. +3. Without exposing yourself to something that is different from that, you are spending a larger majority experiencing it over and over again, as opposed to finding exposure to a solution over and over again. But it can be little at a time. So like maybe following up on some of those things, like what are they doing now? It's like, oh, this is what they're doing. Or like for example, someone like hey, this person broke up with this person a year ago. It's like, this is how they feel. It's exactly how I feel. And then it's like, what are they doing now? Well, they're with someone else. So then you kind of like, oh, we'll see a little of that. It's like, okay, they seem pretty happy. And do they ever talk? And then go back to that. So you're basically slowly scooting yourself away from that. And then you get like the +1. So then you're not only getting a debuff of -5, and then you're removing that debuff of -5. You're getting a debuff of -5, and you get a +1 recovery. So when you got this debuff, you get a +1 buff when it gets cleansed, right? So when that debuff is addressed, you get a recovery bonus, which is like +1. And then you want it to be +2, then +3, and eventually you'll get a net positive result that gets you out of copium. You stop coping, and then in the future, that's a permanent learning lesson. Like you can now, the next time this happens, you'll know how to get out of it even faster, and then you'll just discover new tools. That sounds like it's easy. It's not easy, and it'll take weeks, months, depending on the person, depending on, the heartache, the sources, the counter stimuli and whatnot. But the idea is I can appeal to someone even that's emotionally compromised, that logically one way of finding the solution to something that works for them comes from exposing them to something else that isn't the source of the negativity. It is very, very comforting and cathartic and coping to find shared misery, right? Misery deserves company thing. And that stuff works really well when the source is temporary. What's a potentially more temporary source than a person who continues living? A person who doesn't. I know this sounds dark, but grief, funerals, mourning is a example of something where misery deserves company can be helpful long enough until the source is gone, and the source is that one event. But in this case, you are dealing with something that is recurring. It's going to constantly recur. So if you're coping with something that just reminds you of it, it is usually healthier to try to find something to associate with it that takes you a little bit away from it over and over again. Because if someone is telling you to move on, right, trying to find how to move on, you can't move on if all you're thinking about to make yourself feel better is the actual event, like the related event over and over again. So hopefully maybe something like that. I don't know, sometimes even playing a visual novel game might help. So that's kind of the idea. I know that went a little somewhere else, but I talk about these things in a different context so often. Like there are so many people who use even Twitch and gaming. So naturally, if you're on a Twitch with a gaming person, you're exercising escapism, and escapism is one of the most common intuitive forms of escaping, hence escapism, from something that is chronically there. So it's not uncommon, and you can even feel less lonely about this. You're not alone. Anyone who's using escape, like, commonly, and I'm not saying everyone, I might even exclude myself, sort of. It's very common to find this online, and it's even more common if it's a hobby, and it's even more common if it's like incredibly positive, that someone is escaping from something that's inherently negative, because you're trying to find positive energy in order to counteract the stressors in your life. Regrettably, in my opinion, which I tend to encourage people, there's a difference between coping and resolving. And escapism is a coping mechanism. So what I believe in the future, it's probably not me. I don't have any aspirations to do so, but I like to believe that one day I can just, when someone, if I can deduce that someone has a certain characteristics, I could just say, hey, you should check out this channel. This person is very, very charismatically instructive in how to stop coping with this and start resolving it. But for now, I can definitely feel how I can definitely get a sense of how you're coping with it. And I kid you not, the vast majority of my conversations with people, especially during these digression periods, is dealing with coping mechanisms and how to evolve your coping mechanism, how to improve and refine and elevate the coping mechanism. There are alternatives. You can make your coping even more efficient. If you make your coping more efficient, then it liberates time for the higher chance that you will tackle something that will get you out of the rut, right? So you another way to attack stuff like this is keep on working on becoming more and more efficient at coping. And then when you become more efficient, you get more opportunities. More opportunities to randomly cross paths. So if you're feeling crappy now and it's that thing, that -5, and you can get the debuff removed, like say the debuff lasts for 30 seconds a day. It's probably not 30 seconds a day. It's probably like 2 hours a day, or maybe even the entire school is your stimuli. Like the catalyst, the trigger is going to school. So I don't know how long schools are these days. 5 hours? I have no idea, but it could be that amount. The idea is, how can you shrink it? How can you cope out of that debuff faster? So maybe even putting your 7:30 to 2:10. Wow, that's like 7 hours. 5. Yeah. Okay. So here's another here's another way, right? Another alternative. When you get through that school day and your debuff is on, find clever ways in any way possible to get that debuff removed faster. And the faster you remove that debuff, the less time it stays in your mind. But in that context, but it also liberates as much time possible to counterbalance your stuff. So at some point, you'll become efficient enough to overcome how long it's affecting your mood. And that's an alternative. That's playing to the coping strategy. So if you do feel there's no solution to stretching, becoming more and more efficient at coping is an alternative. And unfortunately, the downside to that is you're relying on luck instead of an intention of solving the problem. And luck doesn't choose when. Luck is not made, right? Well, that's a subjective thing, but if you're relying on something to just come along and take you out of it, or you just grow out of it, it's less consistent than approaching it from the other way, where you're attaching a solution to the coping mechanism. That's guaranteed with effort over time. So the more consistent you become, the more likely you're going to associate that solution with the coping mechanism. However, that stuff has a high barrier. So if you can't start it in the first place, it's not going to start at all. So then you rely on something you already do. So you can tell yourself, you watch sad videos and you feel better after a certain amount of time. It's like, that's a win. That's a W. I got over feeling sad for today by doing this. How do I do it even better? How do I get better at getting over this over and over again? And over time, it can feel like moving on. And then eventually, you don't have time for that. You can just wipe it off, right? It becomes trivial because you've practiced. You practice over time. So those are the, I would say to me, that's how I would phrase two classical ways of getting over something that's chronic, like something that will take up every day. When I think of chronic, it happens every day, whether it's for 5 seconds or 10 seconds or the whole day. A chronic thing is something that occurs daily and it can impact your daily function. So your goal is to offer two ways, the two most common ways to make it stop impacting or minimizing how much it impacts your daily function. This is not a substitute for what your therapist says, you know, like for your professional therapist. Like they know you a lot better than any stranger on Twitch. But the idea is keep it in mind because you have to appeal to yourself, right? I think as a competitive PvP player, Smoke, like I'm trying to integrate whatever I know about you already. If you're a competitive player, ask yourself like, well, you can compete in many ways. So if you already know how to do something, challenge yourself to do it better next time. And that could be coping. You can just become better at coping. Like, okay, if you don't feel like you're in control and you're always going to feel sad, well, you already know, what do you already know how to do? Well, you already told me that you watch sad videos to make you feel better. Well, that's a solution. How can you improve it? What I mean is that's a band-aid, right? That's a coping mechanism. It's a negation, but you can even improve on negation. And those strategies you learn will apply to pretty much any other coping mechanism in the future too. So it is an investment in yourself. So you can rest assured that the effort you place in coping will translate to others. So in the future, you have something and you need to cope with it. Your investigation now will provide strategies in which you can enhance the coping of the next contextually different thing. So you can appeal to your own self, like you're a competitive person. Well, it took you 3 hours to feel better after you had to watch 3 hours worth of sad videos to get better. How can I improve that time? Let's go with 2 hours. And then you start analyzing, you start focusing on like actively figuring out how to maximize recovery time. And that's like a game. It's a game of life, unfortunately. And the more you do all of the above, the less things will phase you. And ultimately, you can recover, you can bounce. In fact, sometimes I don't encourage this. But for me, sometimes I want to figure out what makes me feel sad. Cuz there is the opposite problem where if you're really good at normalizing your behavior, you start feeling numb and you forget how to feel. So for me, most of the time, just to see it from the other end, just to offer a fun perspective, I like to find ways to frustrate myself because I don't remember how it feels. And when I get frustrated and get angry and stuff, I kind of feel a little bit more alive. So, but you can reach a state, in my opinion. This sounds really motivational. Now this sounds more like a life coach thing to say, but you have the ability because you already know certain things that work. So start with those things and make them better. And then when you are no longer emotionally compromised, you can spend some free time coming up with new coping strategies or new things. You can explore new things. Ideally, it's by watching people or talking with another person, talking with family, talking to a therapist. When you're no longer emotionally compromised, it is the golden time to safeguard yourself from everything else and from incoming things. And it's effortless if it's part of your life's routine. So one of the digressions earlier from the other day is that when you're safe and you're cruising along, there's no reason you shouldn't try and optimize even more, right? Well, what I mean is to do not become, try to keep yourself on your toes by not becoming complacent. So what I'm doing now is to prevent myself from getting complacent, as in settling on what I can do now. Like, I'm typically extremely emotionally consistent. I have skills that doesn't make me worry about getting job, convincing people stuff. That's great. But I have to perturb myself. I have to challenge myself in some way so that I don't get lazy. I rest on my laurels. So from a place of pain and a place of emotional compromise, it's the greatest opportunity when you start coping and becoming more efficient and you're recovering. Right the moment you recover is a great opportunity that you can look forward to, in my opinion. Life coach again. Now it's looking life coach because I'm insisting that you might succeed soon. So grain of salt. When you do, you will have in my opinion, you are likely to have a bout of enthusiasm for what I'm about to say, which is it's the opportunity that will be heightened on how to keep on exploring new things so that it doesn't ever happen again. Or when it happens, it's trivial. So you still have that to look forward to. But in this regard, the classical advice in general, like from a non-professional, I guess, is if you know that something works, get it to work better. That's something that doesn't require new input. It's not that barrier that you need to get over, and it doesn't rely on luck because you already know how to do it. It's your W. Your W is to negate the negative feeling. So make that W more efficient. Train it, right? That's kind of the thing. That's a take-home message, by the way. And then we're gonna call this, but I really appreciate you sharing. Being able to communicate that is also training too. You already mentioned that you're not uncomfortable, right? You're not uncomfortable. You're comfortable with sharing certain things. So if you do that more often, it actually helps quite a lot. So if you truly believe you are comfortable with criticism and other opinions, actually farming other I'm not uncomfortable yet. Farming other people's perspective, be it a stranger. In fact, it's probably even more advisable to sample strangers, because if you're truly comfortable being able to say that a couple of times, you own it. You start owning the thing. And that's what I mean by embarrassment and personal questions. When I've been asked about things like, I don't know, sexuality and like relationships and all that about myself so often, but I've gotten so used to explaining it over and over again that I've owned it. Like it becomes, that can also be helpful. So talking about it, that's why talking about with therapists and whatnot, with the confidentiality and stuff, is a great starting point. But ultimately, when you start owning something, the emotions fade away. But at the same time, it becomes a permanent learning lesson, right? So hopefully you sleep well. Hopefully school goes well, and I will, you know, hopefully see you a little bit happier. Anyways, that's a great digression. I like it. All right. So with that said, I guess I'll. Oh yeah, no worries. No, I gotta work out today. So after stream goes off today, I work out. I usually post that stuff in Discord, but I gotta work out. Then I gotta eat, and then I sleep. But I'll get to bed eventually. We're I'm on the East Coast, by the way. It's 3 a.m. I sleep around 6 or 7 a.m. All right, catch you later. As always, thanks for whoever else is hanging out or who will watch this. You know, stay safe, stay healthy. You know, get that positive energy or that net positive mindset, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. All right, take care. Bye now.